All right, off rip. I got to tell you right now, this is the most postmodern thing I've seen in a while. We've got tonight's matchup: Dan D Mac McClellan versus Double E Easy E Ether's Elephant, talking about how we should understand Dan McClellan, whether we should listen to him or not. Let's listen to what Ether's got to say.
So let me back up to make sure this is being made as a clear point. So there is a ton of scientific evidence, way more scientific evidence, that the vaccine is safe and effective than there is for anything Dan McClellan says about his biblical scholarship.
Oh, and right off the bat, you have Ether's Elephant going hard against Dan McClellan, using deconstruction to try to help you see the difference between medical field science, data that you have when you're learning about the vaccine, and the information that Dan McClellan delivers to you and calls quote-unquote data.
And that doesn't mean like 100% certainty on either of those things. But the problem is if you're like denying the vaccine, for example, and also just believing everything Dan McClellan says, then you're disregarding much stronger evidence in favor for very weak evidence.
All right, so here we have Ether trying to introduce a bias towards consistency. He's trying to point out to you that if anything is considered science, it's probably going to be the medical information as opposed to the biblical information you receive from Dan McClellan. So Ether's trying to point out to you that if you say that you believe in science, then to be consistent, which is what Ether hopes you are, is consistent. He says that you should believe in the information about the vaccine even more than you believe in the biblical information that Dan McClellan gives you, and that it's inconsistent if you believe in the biblical information more than you believe in the vaccine if you say that you believe in science.
Now, I'm not saying that everything Dan McClellan says is false. I'm not saying that we know for a fact that there's not problems with the vaccine. That's a whole other issue. Maybe we should be careful in case suddenly the live stream turns off because we're talking about the vaccine. I'd love to talk about that more, though, at some point. Not in this live stream, but it is kind of in my area of not specifically, but anyway, my area of academia, I suppose.
And there it is. Blink and you missed it. But here the elephant plays up his power dynamics by letting us know that his expertise in healthcare data analytics is the reason why you should trust what he believes to be the truth. Now, you'll find that this happens anytime you have people who disagree over the truth. They'll present information, they'll present their expertise, and that's the way that they try to help you subscribe to their power dynamics as an expert so that you can believe their interpretation of what you see.
But anyway, point being is people need to be consistent. If you're just rejecting certain scientific things and then accepting everything Dan says, I don't think that's very consistent.
And there you have it again. Double E trying to introduce bias to get you to be consistent. Again, there's nothing that says that you have to be consistent or inconsistent. That's going to be totally up to you. Maybe you're from a culture that values loyalty over consistency, and so you may choose to be loyal to Dan McClellan because you like him for some reason, or you like what he has to say. Maybe you like what Ether has to say, so you want to choose to be loyal to Ether rather than consistent with the science. That's going to be up to you. But you can see that Ether's trying to introduce a bias towards consistency here.
So as long as you're taking kind of everything with a little bit more of a grain of salt, then I think that's better.
Oh, expert move by Double E there, throwing a little bit of fade on the reliability of Dan McClellan's information so that you take it with a grain of salt. In other words, don't just believe it at face value.
But I'll pause there. Taylor, you probably have a lot of things to say. Go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, I think for me, like, science in itself, like, and I mean, my field of study, I study language.
Taylor tags in, immediately powers up by explaining his expertise in language. Can we expect a language attack here? We'll see.
Like, I mean, I science itself means knowledge.
Looks like he's going for it. He's probably going to give a word history, show some slippage, how the word usage has changed over time. Anytime you give history, it's an easy way to power up, because when you give historical information, people get the impression that you know. It makes you seem more reliable, powering you up right away.
Right? It comes from Latin scientia, means knowledge. And that in and of itself is deceiving because we call science, like the scientific method that was developed during, the Enlightenment period from the 16th and 17th centuries. They developed the scientific method. in and of itself is not scientific. It was a social construct by philosophers.
And that could be the play of the day by Taylor, showing you that science is a historical social construct, which means a certain group of people decided what was science and what was not, and that meaning has changed over time, fading Dan McClellan's reliability and letting you know anything that he says when he tries to authorize it and make it seem more powerful by saying it's data or saying it's science means that it's in question, because depending on who you talk to, the reliability of that information is going to be in question. Nice job, Taylor. Wow.
So most scientists nowadays will laugh philosophers out the room for considering themselves logical analysts.
Such a clever play by Taylor. He's looking unstoppable out there. He just showed that science has changed over time, so that now the scientists who run the game now no longer recognize the OG scientists, aka the philosophers, as people who do science, meaning that anything that you believe to be science now could change in the future. Continually fading what Dan McClellan says. Oh my!
I mean, even though they are like,
yeah,
science in of itself is a social construct, and I think that we have to start the conversation there. The scientific method in and of itself was born out of metaphysical thought and reason. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So it's like,
yeah.
I think that we have to be really, really careful, and it's just baked into what we teach kids nowadays in school, that science, like, oh, well, this is what the science says, follow the science. This is what the empirical data is going to tell you.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is insufficient and very limited. And so when you take an approach like Dan does that says, hey, this is the only way to see this, it has to be data driven, in like you said, a field where the data that we have at best is
it sucks.
The data at best that we have, it's not great. And so like the empirical data that we do have, we can't draw a lot of inferences from. We can't really apply the scientific method like we can apply it with other fields of study. And so it's really,
we're not as confident.
Tough.
Yeah.
Right.
And you'll hear
it's tough to do that.
And there you have it, folks. The saga continues. It's an ongoing battle. People giving their own credentials, powering up, dismissing others, shading others' points of view, reminding others that their position is socially constructed. You name it, we did it. One thing I love about the Book of Mormon is it constantly talks about these types of issues. How do you figure out who has the quote-unquote facts, who has the goods, who has the quote-unquote data? Well, we know that if you can build a direct connection with God, which you can, He can help you and bless you to know the truth of all things through His Holy Spirit. That's one more reason why I love the Book of Mormon, baby!